The day they lowered Donald Reeves into the ground, the California fog hung over the cemetery like a held breath, thick and waiting. A lawyer in a black raincoat pressed a scuffed leather logbook into Larry's hands. "Your grandfather wanted you to have this," he said, then walked away. Larry boarded the ferry back to San Francisco. The island of Alcatraz passed in the window, gray stone and cold steel, already receding into fog. Inside the front cover, in aged pencil, 6 rules. The first read, "Do not count the inmates on the 3rd Wednesday of any month." Larry felt the hairs on his arms rise. The ferry engine droned underneath. He barely heard it.
A rule against counting prisoners? That wasn't superstition. That was fear.
5 more rules followed below. Cryptic, precise, written in the same careful hand. Each one pushed the world a little further off its axis. Tucked inside the back cover, Larry found a faded photograph. His grandfather Donald in his correctional officer uniform, 1962, standing rigid outside a cell block.
He looked so young, and he looked like a man who had already stopped asking questions.
He turned back to the first rule and read it again. The words hadn't changed, but something inside him already had. He ran his thumb down the page to the second rule, the graphite smudging slightly under his touch. The pencil had bitten deep into the paper, as if Donald had pressed hard while writing. "The man in cell B negative, 138, is not always an inmate."
Not always an inmate. What did that even mean? A guard? A visitor? Or something that only looked like a man?
He had never set foot in Alcatraz, but the image came anyway, a dark shape seated on a cot in a barred room, motionless, waiting. The third rule, "The bay fog at 2 a.m. carries voices. Do not respond." Through the ferry window, fog was clotted over the black water. He suddenly didn't want to think about what might be calling from inside it.
2 in the morning. The hour when the world feels thinnest.
The fourth rule, "If you hear cell doors closing on D block when D block is empty, walk straight past."
Walk straight past. Like he'd done it 100 times. Like ignoring it was the only safe choice.
He glanced again at his grandfather's photograph. The rules weren't the superstitions of a frightened man. They were field notes from someone who had survived things that weren't supposed to exist. He turned the page to the 5th rule, and the handwriting here was smaller, as if Donald had been reluctant to commit it to paper. "The lighthouse on the island runs on its own schedule."
Its own schedule. No keeper. No logic. Just a light that decides for itself when to spin.
Then the last rule, no preamble, no qualifiers, just 6 words. "Anyone who escaped from Alcatraz is still on Alcatraz."
Still there. Not dead. Not caught. Still on the island. The implications sank into his chest like cold stone.
The ferry docked, but he barely registered the jolt. Alcatraz was behind him now, but it suddenly felt much closer than before. That night, in his apartment, Larry propped the logbook open next to his laptop. He typed "Alcatraz Escape 1962 and spent hours reading. Morris and the Anglin brothers, 3 inmates who tunneled out with spoons and dummies. The FBI swore they drowned. The bodies were never found."
The official story had always felt thin. Now, with my grandfather's words, it felt like a lie.
He called the FBI's FOIA office the next morning. The clerk's voice went flat when he said Alcatraz. Yes, the file existed. No, it wouldn't be released quickly. He submitted the request anyway, attaching his press credentials. Waiting was the worst part. He kept glancing at the logbook like it might open itself and answer. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, thin and stamped with a fading FBI seal. Larry tore it open over his kitchen table. Inside, a dozen pages, most of them blacked out, whole paragraphs reduced to opaque bars. The official story was a skeleton with no bones.
Every line that might have answered a question was gone. They'd buried it deeper than the escape tunnel.
Frustrated, he pushed the FBI file aside and reached for his grandfather's logbook. It fell open to a page dated the 11th of June, 1962. Donald's cursive was tight, almost panicked. 3 men escaped tonight. 5 were counted leaving the cell. 2 have not been identified.
5 counted. The FBI swore 3 escaped. 2 extra men and my grandfather noted it like a grocery list.
The entry continued, and the next line turned his blood cold. The other 2 were here before the penitentiary was built. I have stopped asking questions. Larry set the logbook down very carefully, as if it were a live thing. The rules no longer seemed like warnings for guards. They felt like survival tactics for something that predated concrete and bars.
Whatever escaped that night wasn't just Frank Morris and the Anglins. Something else left with them, and maybe something stayed behind.
He closed the logbook and sat in the dark for a long time. By morning, he'd made the decision. He had to walk those corridors himself. He booked a night tour online, the last slot of the day. The screen said, limited availability. He didn't hesitate. He packed his messenger bag. Logbook, camera, a notebook. The weight of the logbook felt heavier than it should.
I've memorized the rules. That should be enough, but it doesn't feel like enough.
That night, he dreamed of D-Block. Heavy steel doors slammed in sequence, closer and closer. But the corridor was empty. Then fog rolled in, and inside the fog, wet voices whispered his name. 3 syllables dragged through water.
Don't respond. Don't respond. Don't.
He woke at 3:12 a.m., drenched. The fog outside his window looked too thick, too deliberate. By afternoon, he stood at the San Francisco ferry terminal, the logbook tucked against his ribs. The bay air was cold and salty.
My grandfather made this crossing 1,000 times. He never escaped it. Not really. I am starting to understand why.
The island rose out of the fog like a clenched fist. Gray, silent, and waiting, the ferry bumped the dock, and Larry stepped onto the island. A woman in a Navy NPS jacket waited at the gate, sharp eyes behind glasses, a small group already clustered behind her.
Welcome to Alcatraz. I am Margaret Cole, your guide tonight. The island already has its own ideas about hospitality. Stick close.
They passed through the Sally Port and into the cell house. The air closed in, chill, damp, heavy with salt and old rust.
D-Block was where we kept the most dangerous men. The isolation cells are just ahead. Some officers refuse to walk these tiers after dark.
Rule 4. If you hear cell doors closing when the block is empty, walk straight past. It felt less like a warning now, and more like a memory pressed into the walls.
The inmates left their marks, names, dates, prayers scratched into the walls. But some marks have no name, no date, as if the stone itself added them.
They passed the old guard station. Larry slowed, staring at the worn desk, the empty logbook slot. His own logbook seemed to pulse inside his bag.
Not everything that happened here made it into the official reports. Some events we just stopped writing down.
She knows. Not everything, but enough. And she's warning us without saying it directly.
He fell into step at the back of the group, letting the darkness of D-Block settle behind him. The rules were no longer just his grandfather's legacy. They were a field guide, and he was already inside the map. The group stopped at a junction where the tier opened into a wider atrium. Margaret turned to face them, her flashlight beam steady on the floor.
The most common report we get isn't about sounds or shadows. It's about photographs. Visitors show us images with extra figures standing among the group, always in clothes from the 1930s. She swiped her tablet and turned it toward the group. A photo of a previous tour, smiling tourists, and just behind the guide, a man in a fedora and pinstriped suit that nobody remembered.
Rule 6. Anyone who escaped from Alcatraz is still on Alcatraz. Was I about to prove it?
A tourist chuckled nervously and asked if it was a Photoshop trick. Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes.
We've had the photos analyzed by labs, no tampering. The island doesn't need Photoshop.
Larry stepped back, raising his phone. He lined up the group, the guide, and the dark corridor beyond.
If there's something here, let it show itself.
He pressed the shutter. The flash popped white, briefly bleaching the stone and iron. No one else noticed. He lowered the phone and stared at the screen, breath caught, waiting for the image to resolve. The image resolved slowly, pixel by pixel. First the guide, sharp and real, then the tourists, slightly blurred from the flash. Larry's eye caught something in the background, a shape that didn't fit the frame. He brought the screen closer. He pinched the screen, zooming into the space behind Margaret's shoulder. The shape resolved into a man in correctional officer uniform, gray shirt, dark cap, brass buttons, smiling, holding a clipboard.
Larry felt the blood leave his face. That's not possible. But his thumb zoomed further.
The face sharpened. Donald Reeves, 30 years old, exactly as he looked in the 1962 photograph. The same calm, knowing expression, but it was the clipboard that stopped his heart. 2 words, written in Donald's own hand, clear as day.
Larry Allen. His name. Written on a board, held by a ghost.
He looked up, panicked. The group was still listening to Margaret, laughing at something she'd said. None of them had noticed. He locked the phone and shoved it into his pocket, his pulse hammering. The rules had expected him all along. He forced himself to rejoin the group, but his hand stayed pressed against his pocket, the phone a hot stone. Margaret led them into the isolation cells, the hole, and told a story about an inmate who'd scratched prayers into the floor. Larry absorbed none of it.
I need another photo. That first one had to be a reflection, a glitch. There are no such things as ghosts.
He pulled out the phone and snapped a picture of an empty cell. Just bars and a bare cot. The image came back clean, unremarkable. Then he turned and shot a wider frame of the corridor, the group ghosting ahead. He reviewed it instantly, heart hammering.
Still nothing. It was just a trick of the light. But the name, my name, can't be light.
He tried one more, aiming back where the figure had stood. The photo populated, empty stone, empty bars, the flash's ghost still fading from his vision. But at the very edge of the frame, a smudge of gray that could have been a shoulder, a peaked cap, or nothing at all.
It's not nothing. I saw it. Ghosts aren't just the inmates. The guards never left.
The tour ended with a walk through the yard. Cold salt wind slapped his face. He didn't look at the lighthouse. He knew it was running on its own schedule, and he knew who was watching. The ferry horn blew low across the water. Larry found a corner near the stern, away from the tourists, and pulled out his phone again. He scrolled to the first photo again, the one with Donald. The figure was still there, still holding his name. Not a glitch, not a reflection.
You saw something tonight, didn't you? I noticed you snapping photos like a man possessed.
A trick of the light. Probably nothing.
The island doesn't produce tricks. It produces records. Some of us, we recognize the officers in the photos, especially the ones who never checked out.
What do you mean? Never checked out?
The lighthouse keeps its own schedule. The fog carries voices. And the men who walked these tiers, some of them never left, even after they retired. I think you already know that.
She handed him a worn business card, Margaret Cole, retired NPS, with a handwritten phone number on the back.
If you want to understand what your grandfather was protecting, call Marcus Willett. He was a guard here in the 60s. He lives in a retirement home near Oakland.
Later that night, in his apartment, Larry traced the card's edge. The logbook sat open on his desk. He had a name now, a living link. Tomorrow he would call. He called the number the next morning. An old voice answered, thin as paper. 2 hours later, Larry parked outside a low concrete building, Oak Haven Retirement Home. Marcus Willett sat near a window, a wool blanket over his knees. His hands were twisted with arthritis, but his eyes, when they found Larry, were alarmingly clear.
Mr. Willett, I am Larry Allen. Donald Reeves was my grandfather.
Donald. God, I haven't heard that name in decades. He saved my life once. On the third Wednesday of a month, he never counted. The rules. He wrote them, didn't he? I knew he would. He told me once that if he ever left, he'd leave a warning.
I've seen things, photographs. My grandfather, on Alcatraz, still holding a clipboard with my name. Is he trapped there?
Trapped. Number. He's still on duty. We all are. The ones who saw too much. The island doesn't let go. And now that you've been there, now that you know, look at this. We were young. We thought it was just a job. But after the count came out wrong, after we heard the doors close on an empty block, we knew. Don't dig any deeper. Don't publish anything. Live your life and forget the island. Otherwise, you'll clock in like the rest of us, and you won't ever clock out.
Larry left the home walking too fast, the logbook cold under his arm. The choice that had seemed abstract before was now razor-edged. Publish and be pulled in, or stay silent and live with the ghost at his window. He drove home in silence, the freeway blurring past. The logbook on the passenger seat felt like a third passenger, watchful, waiting.
Don't publish. Don't dig. Just forget. But forgetting felt like drowning in shallow water.
In his apartment, he set the logbook on the desk and sat before it. His phone, with the ghost photo, lay beside, evidence that the world didn't work the way he'd believed. He opened the logbook to the rule about the lighthouse. His grandfather's sketch of the light seemed to pulse in the lamp glow. Somewhere outside, a foghorn sounded low and long. His building was miles from the bay. The hair on his neck prickled.
That's not possible. There are no foghorns here. He crossed to the window and pulled the curtain.
Fog pressed against the glass, thick, smelling of salt. Down on the street, under a lamppost, a figure in a peaked cap stood motionless, looking up.
He's here. He's not just on the island. The knowledge is a tether.
He backed away, but a sound stopped him, the heavy clank of a cell door closing somewhere inside his apartment. He grabbed the logbook and his keys, but he didn't run. The rules were clear. Walk straight past. But the door wasn't on D Block anymore. It was in his own hallway. The island had found him. The clank echoed once more. Then the apartment fell silent. Larry forced his feet forward, deeper into the dark hallway, the logbook a shield against his chest. On the wall to his right, a shadow stretched like the outline of a barred door, too precise to be accidental. It flickered, and a soft scraping sound ran along the floor.
Walk straight past. The rule is in my bones now. He brushed the shadow with his shoulder, cold, like passing through fog.
In the kitchen, the fridge light buzzed erratically, casting staccato flashes across a small notepad on the counter that hadn't been there minutes before. In Donald's handwriting, keep the logbook safe. Don't let them read it.
Them? Who? As he stared, the words faded, the graphite retreating into the paper like water sinking into sand.
His phone buzzed on the counter, a withheld number. The screen lit with a single message. We know you visited Oak Haven. We need to discuss the logbook. Larry switched the phone off. The net was closing, not just supernatural, but human. Someone had been waiting for him to inherit the logbook.
He stared at his grandfather's photograph, the calm face that had seen all this coming. You knew they'd come for it. You were counting on me.
He set the photo down and opened the logbook to the last page, the one blank. In the margin, in fresh pencil, 2 words. Stay quiet. He understood now. The logbook wasn't a memoir. It was a duty roster that never stopped being written. Larry stood motionless in the dark kitchen, the logbook's pulse echoing the one in his chest. The message on the notepad had vanished, but he could still feel its pressure. A soft knock came at the front door. 3 taps, 2 rhythmic. He remembered Rule 3, do not respond to the voices. But this wasn't fog. This was his mailbox.
They're already here. Not just ghosts, flesh and blood. Did Marcus send them? Or is this the FBI, 50 years late?
He pulled out his grandfather's photograph, the only clear instruction he had. The calm smile seemed to say, you already know what to do.
Publish and become part of the story, trapped on the island, maybe forever. Or swallow the truth and let the world keep its comfortable lies. He set the photo down.
The knocking came again, harder. A voice, male, clipped, called through the wood, Mr. Allen, we know you are in there. Open the door and we can resolve this quietly. He didn't answer. Instead, he knelt and pulled open the small fire safe under his desk. The logbook slid in next to his grandfather's badge. He locked it with a click that felt like a sentence. The knocking stopped. From outside, the foghorn moaned again, closer now, rattling the window. In the distance, through the gauze of fog, the beam of Alcatraz's lighthouse swept across the city.
I won't publish. I won't let them use me. But I'll never be free of this. The island is my beat now. He pressed his palm flat against the cold glass.
The safe hummed faintly, as if the logbook inside was recording. Larry didn't sleep that night. He sat in the armchair, watching the door, the photo of Donald propped on his knee. At 2 a.m., the fog grew voices, but he didn't answer. Dawn bled pale gray through the windows. The fog had lifted, leaving only the cold certainty that the night was not an ending. It was a summons. He unlocked the safe and drew out the logbook. It fell open to a crisp page near the back, one that had been blank yesterday. In his grandfather's hand, an 8th rule. On the 3rd Wednesday, someone must count. If the count is ever right, the door closes. If not, the island keeps what it took.
The count wasn't just a warning. It was a procedure, one my grandfather left for me. Tomorrow is the 3rd Wednesday.
His phone rang, Oak Haven. A nurse's voice, brittle with regret. Mr. Willett passed in the night. He left a sealed envelope. He drove back to Oakland. A young aide handed him a thin envelope, her face troubled. Inside, a single brass key and a scrap of paper, Marcus's handwriting, shaking. Cell B-138 has a lock that fits this key. Use it on the 3rd Wednesday. Count everyone. And Larry, don't forget yourself.
Count myself, because I am there. I've been there since the photograph. The island already has my name.
He booked the next ferry to Alcatraz the evening before the 3rd Wednesday. There were no tours, but a maintenance visit could be arranged for a price. He paid. As he packed the logbook and key, his phone flashed with the ghost photograph. Donald's smile hadn't changed, but the clipboard now read, "Bring your name." The evening ferry was nearly empty. Larry sat at the stern, the brass key cold in his palm. The logbook opened to the 8th rule. Alcatraz grew out of the fog like a memory. No guide met him this time. A bored security guard waved him through after checking a clipboard. Maintenance, Larry said. The lie sat heavy. The cell house was silent. The tourist gates chained shut. He walked D-block alone, only emergency lights casting long, trembling shadows. His footsteps echoed back too fast.
Rule 4. Walk straight past. But I am not walking past tonight. I am walking in.
Cell B-138 was at the very end, its bars darker than the others. The shadow inside did not move. It simply waited. He slid the brass key into a lock he had never seen, a small plate set into the concrete, not the standard barred door. It fit with a sad, perfect click.
Marcus knew this exact lock. He must have used it. And now it's my turn.
A cold draft slithered out of the cell, smelling of salt and something else. Old sweat, old stone. He heard the lighthouse mechanism whir somewhere above, running its own schedule. He checked the logbook one last time. The 8th rule pulsed. On the 3rd Wednesday, someone must count. He turned the key. The lock yielded, and the cell door swung inward on silent hinges. The shadow on the cot did not rise. It simply raised its head, and Larry saw that it had no face, only a clipboard. Larry froze in the doorway. The figure was not a man. It was a negative space, a hollow in the shape of a guard. The clipboard it held glowed faintly, the words writing themselves as he watched. The clipboard filled with names, a roster in Donald's handwriting. At the top, Morris, Anglin, X2. Below them, 3 more names from the 1930s. And at the very bottom, Larry Allen.
My name. It's already in the logbook of the dead. The count includes me.
The shadow lifted a hand, one finger pointing past Larry's shoulder. Cold air slithered into the corridor, and behind him, cell doors groaned open one by one. Shapes stood in the gloom. Men in stripes, men in civilian suits from another era, a pale woman in a nurse's uniform. All motionless, all watching.
Everyone who ever escaped. Everyone who never left. And one journalist who came looking for a story.
The clipboard flashed. A tally mark scratched itself next to each name, stopping at 7. But a thin line of light quivered, waiting.
It wants me to finish the count, to mark myself. And then the door closes, the island keeps what it took.
He took the pencil that materialized in his fingers and drew the final line. The clipboard went dark, and the cell door behind him slammed shut. In the darkness, a voice exactly like his grandfather's whispered, "Your shift begins now." Officer Allen, and the fog outside the barred window roared with 1,000 voices, answering. The dark held still for a heartbeat. Then Larry's eyes adjusted. He was still in B-138, but the cell had changed. The walls were clean, the cot made, a guard's uniform laid out neatly.
Not a prisoner, a keeper. That's what the count was for, to trap the ones who belong, and to bind the ones who volunteer.
The guard station at the end of the tier flickered with warm amber light, as if welcoming him. A silhouette in the chair raised a hand in greeting.
I told you once that anyone who escaped stays here, but I never said we were the exception. Welcome to the night shift, Larry.
Then, what happens now? Do I haunt a cell, or do I walk the tier?
You walk, you count, you make sure the count never comes out right, not on a 3rd Wednesday, not ever. That's the bargain that keeps the thing under the island sleeping. They'll send another officer eventually. Someone who inherits a logbook, someone who asks too many questions. You'll know when. Until then, stand your post.
Outside the high window, the lighthouse beam swung through the fog on its own schedule. Larry felt it in his bones now, a heartbeat that wasn't his. He turned back to the desk and opened the logbook. The 8th rule had a fresh line beneath it, in his own handwriting now. Walk the tier, count the dead. Don't forget yourself. When the morning ferry docked with its first tourists, a group photograph in D block captured a ghostly officer standing just outside the frame, clipboard in hand, a familiar smile on a face that was now part of the rock forever. Decades passed. The logbook sat in a safety deposit box until a young woman with Donald Reeves' jawline received a letter from an estate lawyer. She opened the cover and found the same 6 rules, the pencil still sharp after 60 years. Her breath caught on the first line. Tucked inside was not one photograph, but 2, Donald Reeves and Larry Allen, side by side in correctional officer uniform, their smiles calm and knowing. Below the rules, A fresh entry in a different hand. Count the dead. Walk the tier. Never forget. Signed with 2 initials. L.A. She boarded the next ferry to Alcatraz, the logbook heavy in her bag. The bay fog curled around the island like a held breath. D Block was unchanged. The same shadows stretched under the wire-caged bulbs. The same silence hummed with a pressure that was not silence. She raised her phone, pressed the shutter. The flash bleached the tier. When the image resolved, a ghostly officer stood just behind her. He held a clipboard, and on it a single word, welcome. The same calm smile she'd seen in the photograph tucked inside the logbook. On the ferry back, she closed the logbook. Outside the window, the lighthouse beam swept the bay on its own schedule, and she understood. The rules were not a warning. They were a set of keys. She pressed her palm to the cold glass. Somewhere on the island, Larry Allen walked his tier, counted the dead, and waited. The logbook would find its next keeper soon enough. In her apartment, the logbook opened itself to a blank page. Fresh pencil scratched a date, the next 3rd Wednesday, and beneath it, her name. A foghorn groaned through the window. Through the mist, the lighthouse beam swept the bay, running its own schedule. She placed the logbook in her bag and stepped into the night. The ferry was waiting, as if it had known she would come. On the crossing, the island materialized like a memory. A figure in uniform stood at the dock, raising a hand in greeting. D Block held its breath. Her footsteps echoed too fast. Cell B-138 was open, a shadow waiting inside. Inside, a ghostly officer stood with a clipboard. He smiled, the same smile from the photograph, and offered her a pencil. The roster listed every keeper. Donald Reeves, Marcus Willett, Larry Allen. A blank line trembled at the bottom. She wrote her name. The graphite flared cold. The cell door clicked shut behind her. A new uniform lay on the cot. She understood then. Escape was never the promise. The logbook is a shift schedule. Tonight, she clocked in. At the guard station, the logbook lay open. A 9th rule, in her hand, always filled a blank. The island keeps what it takes. The guard station stood empty, but the logbook stayed open on the desk. A new page slowly darkened with fresh pencil, writing the date of the next 3rd Wednesday. The lighthouse beam swept through the high barred windows, sliding across the empty cells, a pulse that had never stopped. On the tiers, the shadows walked their own rounds. The island breathed salt and old stone, patient as the tide. Cell B-138 held its faceless watcher, clipboard at the ready. It never moved, and it never left. Outside, a foghorn moaned. The island's lighthouse spun its silent gear, keeping time for no one but itself. The logbook accumulated rules like sediment. Each generation added a line, and the island remembered every name. Ferries still crossed the bay. Some passengers felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind, a prickle of being watched, and in every tour group's photograph, if you looked, a ghostly officer stood at the edge of the frame, clipboard in hand, counting. The count never came out right. Not on a 3rd Wednesday. Not ever. And the island kept what it took. In a quiet bank vault, a hand reached for the scuffed leather logbook, its spine cracked with age. The cover fell open to the first rule. The pencil lines still sharp after 60 years. The last page bore a single fresh line. You were always coming here. The nightly ferry cut through the fog, its few passengers pulling coats tighter against the damp. Alcatraz emerged out of the mist, the lighthouse beam a slow, unblinking eye that obeyed only its own schedule. The guard station lamp burned alone. Shadows moved where no walker was, pacing their rounds. A tour group posed. The flash caught an officer at the edge, clipboard in hand, already counting. On the desk, the logbook lay open. a freshly sharpened pencil waiting beside it. A pencil rolled, stopped on a blank page. The count had already started, and somewhere, on an empty tier, the next keeper's name was being written in a book that never ended.